So we're here to talk about content.
We are here to talk about content.
The role of content in our strategies is paramount.
To drive revenue, we need to appeal to the emotional side of the reader.
You know, with AI, it's a great tool, but it's just a tool.
It's huge now, like everybody's writing content as they should be, but it does mean that now it's harder to differentiate yourself from your competitor.
What you want as a business is you want to be the one that's cited.
People want shorter content. They want information quicker than they've ever wanted it before.
The search landscape is changing. We all know this.
So much has changed, but also so much is still the backbone of what we know as SEO.
They're looking for the information and you need to be the one to provide that information to them.
You know, there is a strategy that can produce content, but then there's a strategy that produces content that's actually going to make revenue.
Hey everyone, Richard Hill here. Welcome back to the eComOne podcast. Today, I'm handing things over to two of the team here at eComOne. Aoife, our content lead, and Alex, one of our amazing account managers, for a really useful conversation on content, how it's changing, and what's actually working right now in the age of AI. Now, what I like about this conversation is that it's practical, not just about creating more content for the sake of it. It's about understanding what your audience really is looking for, how to build trust, how to turn content into something that actually supports visibility, authority, and revenue. So whether you're leading content in-house, working with an agency, or just trying to work out what good content looks like now, there's loads of value in this one. So do me one quick favor. Hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. Right, let's dive in.
So hello, Alex. Welcome to the podcast. It's both of our first times on, I think.
Thank you, Eva. It is indeed my first time ever doing a podcast. And,
yeah.
It's exciting, a bit nervous. So we're here to talk about content.
We are here to talk about content. Do you want to start by introing yourself?
I'm Alex. I'm an account manager over here at eComOne. And
I am Aoife, and I am the content lead here at eComOne. So I think we're very well versed in talking about this. We've had a lot of time working together. We've had some challenges, some amazing wins as well. I think that content is such a diverse subject. There's so much to talk about here. So I am very ready to dive in with you and get started.
It is huge, to be fair. I mean, the role of content in our strategies is paramount. It's the majority of what our kind of like our new work, kind of like the new exploration work and new research work. It's all driven through content. And you know, with the rise of AI, we are seeing the importance of correct content titles, correct strategy. You know, it keeps getting more and more important by the day. So, in your role day to day, what would you say is a perfectly written piece of content? What would you call perfect?
Well, that is a very difficult question. And I think especially in the role of AI, I mean, we're not even 5 minutes in and we're already saying AI, which shows how much of a big deal it is nowadays. But I think when you say a perfectly written piece of content, to me, it is one that is very emotionally driven, actually. And I think that's something we'll probably go into further. But a lot of pieces of content nowadays, especially because of AI, they're very straight to the mark, just very factual, and that's great. But for me, to drive revenue, we need to appeal to the emotional side of the reader. We need to understand like what it is that they are looking for in terms of like their problems, like how can we resolve them, and also how that product is actually different from any other piece on the market, because it's huge now. Like everybody's writing content as they should be, but it does mean that now it's harder to differentiate yourself from your competitor. So for me, a perfectly written piece of content, just from like the first standpoint and the most important thing that I think is actually getting into the shoes of the reader, whoever you want to appeal to, and understanding how you can change their life. And that can sound really silly. It can sound really dramatic, because if you're selling something, just like a pen, for example, you think, well, that's not really life-changing. But in a very small way it is. And that's what you need to get across to the reader.
100%. I totally agree. And like, you got to remember as well, the readers, they're not just like ambiguous people. They're all looking for something. They're looking for the information. That's why they're on this page. That's why they're putting these questions into ChatGPT or Claude. They're looking for the information, and you need to be the one to provide that information to them in a way that they understand and in kind of the most succinct way as you can make it. And I think that the way that people have been looking for kind of content, information, questions, answers, I think that's changed over the last couple of years. What do you think has happened?
I think that content has changed because of the likes of social media. And I think people want shorter content. They want information quicker than they've ever wanted it before. Because, back in the day, you'd have like YouTube, for example, which would be long form videos. But now people are more used to the TikTok format of getting like really quick, 30-second almost dopamine hits and getting the information at their fingertips. And I think we still do need long form content, absolutely, because that will be the basis of anything. But I think we need to be more concise in the way that we deliver content and making sure that the information, like there's no waffle, cut out the waffle and deliver exactly what they want. I mean, it used to be a case of like telling a story, and in a way that is still important, but we need to just cut to the chase and make sure that every piece of content has a purpose. So I think content needs to be delivered in a way that is short, concise, really easy to skim through. And I think, from your perspective, it would be really interesting to hear about how that would also help, or like, how would it change the way that you would create a strategy?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So that leads in exactly into kind of the point I was going to start making about the way that users have been looking for information has changed, but also the way that the information is getting served up has changed. And it's kind of hard to sometimes tell which one is leading the other, especially, with AI. What you're seeing is specific snippets and specific citations appearing within answers. And then what you want as a business is you want to be the one that's cited, because that's what's going to drive the traffic to the site. It also kind of drives the trust signals that multiple search engines use, and multiple AI engines use as well. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get cited, and there's only a few sentences that ever get cited. If you look at the way that AI serves information up, it picks and chooses multiple different sources, compiles them together, and sends them over to you, right? So we need to be structuring the information so that it works in a way that makes it easy for these engines to give that information over to the user. We're also seeing that in not just AI, but within traditional search. The search landscape is changing. We all know this. There's fewer spaces available in that page one to rank as a traditional result. So there's other ways you've got to be thinking about working your site into the results pages. And the way that we write, I think, is the way that we achieve that goal of trying to get more coverage in that page one that really drives users to the sites and our client sites. So when you see something that is when you type in something on, like, say, ChatGPT, do you ever have a look, kind of see what the citations are showing? Do you ever have a look through what pages are getting suggested? Like, do you ever have a little read about what's happening on there?
Yeah, I do. So I think it is a really important thing to do. And it's the same as, it's funny because we say so much has changed, but also so much is still the backbone of what we know as SEO. So back in the day, you would just do a bit of competitor analysis. You would go onto the SERPs and you would look at what is ranking currently, how you can make it better. And that would be like the baseline of your content. Whereas right now, a really great thing to do, and I think it's a trick that a lot of people are missing, is to go onto ChatGPT, search what you want to be found for on these AI search engines. It doesn't just have to be obviously ChatGPT, and look at what is already there and taking that and understanding, right, well, how can I take that and almost replace it quite easily? Citations is a big thing, and I think it is still developing. I don't think a lot of people are focusing on it, and it's definitely something that we should, because you take that information and you could be there instead if you just make those improvements.
That's right.
But how, it's one thing saying take that and, use it as your backbone, but how do you think we should go about doing that in terms of like making sure that we are taking over those citations that are already there? So,
you touched on it briefly. You touched on having a look, seeing for yourself what's appearing. Well, that fundamentally gives you a lot of the answers that you're kind of looking for. If you see what's being cited and you see what's appearing in the SERP, that gives you 60-70% of the kind of the methodology that you'd use to try and replicate what's working, as well as seeing what can you do slightly better. A really good way of doing this is, like, if you type in a question in ChatGPT and it gives you a bunch of it gives a bunch of answers. It'll pull from places like, from Reddit, from Google. It'll pull from various different sources. See if those citations are actually answering the question. Because if they're not, then it's going to be looking for something that is answering that question. And that's where you could work in your content and your plan to try and like feed the answer in a more cohesive way so that it gets the citations that we're kind of looking for. But also, you're going to have to remember there is an element of trust that website has built up over time. So a well-trusted website that doesn't always answer the question directly could and often does still end up being cited instead of your website. So you've got to think, how are you positioned within these citations and within these search engine results so that you can kind of take advantage of the opportunity that they're giving you. And kind of, you've got to be a bit realistic with it. So unfortunately, we can't win on every single front. So you've got to pick and choose which questions you want answered and where you can answer them in a way that you become the kind of the professional that gets cited. So with these kind of, let's say, with this new area of SEO, which is AI, would you therefore say that a lot of the rules that we used to use are still applicable in content writing today, or would you say that the rule sets changed completely in the last couple of years?
This is something I'm actually really passionate about because I think so many people are overthinking it. Everyone's there saying SEO is dead. It's something we've spoken about so many times, like on this podcast and on LinkedIn, and it is not. Like, the baseline of what you're doing should pretty much be the same. You should still be targeting these primary keywords, secondary keywords, making sure that you've got internal links, external links. Like, the framework of content is still the same. It just means that we are ensuring that it is in direct line of what people are searching for. And if you think about it, that is pretty much actually what we used to do as well. But I just think it means now it should be shorter, snappier. It answers the question directly instead of adding a little bit of fluff. I don't think that much has really changed, because if you look at what AI is, choosing from, it is blogs. It is like the standard content that we were always putting out. There are things that can help, obviously, like, for example, video is now probably a bigger factor now than it ever used to be. But the baseline of a content strategy or an SEO strategy, it is pretty, I think, and you may disagree or you may think there are other elements, but I do think the baseline is still very much the same. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. It's fundamentally, good SEO today is the same thing that good SEO was 5 years ago. If anything, we've cut out a lot of the kind of the almost like cheat tactics and kind of quick wins that people used to use. We've cut out a lot of those, and now it's all about building topical authority. It's all about building trust. It's all about getting yourself kind of mentioned in discussion boards and forums, because the way that search engines kind of look for trustworthy sites nowadays, it is that that people element. Are people talking about you outside of just what you're writing about yourself? So, I've been hearing a lot more kind of rumors and murmurs out there about forums and about discussion boards and about kind of how they're becoming more and more important. Are you hearing anything like that?
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of those, it would be good to hear your perspective on how they are used within the strategy. Like, are people just using them within content? I know that's something that we do, using them within like the FAQ, stuff like that. Or are people actually starting their own discussions on the forum boards themselves? Like, how are they being utilized within like our sort of SEO strategies to help drive revenue and, brand visibility?
It's a really interesting topic, actually. So it's one of those things that you don't want to be disingenuous. You don't want to be, making up any information, but getting yourself known on these boards is important. So when you see questions out there that you as a brand have an answer to, there's nothing wrong with you answering that question for that user, because you're going to be probably the most trusted source. As effectively, if you sell a specific product and somebody wants to know more about that product type, there aren't many people that are going to know more about that product than you. So there's nothing to stop you from answering that question, which in turn is one of the big driving factors in how your content and your answers get surfaced as well. You can effectively help drive some of that trust building and trust signals through discussion boards, And I would say that there's nothing wrong with answering questions yourself. Just don't try and pretend to not be you guys. It's never looking good when you pretend to be something. We've all seen them out there where where you can see, that's a very niche answer to something that only you guys would know. So it's good just to be open with your audience, but there's nothing wrong with answering. Ultimately, the search engines and AI engines, they're not gonna care really whether you're a brand or you're a person. Other than the fact that they're going to be trying to attribute that the topic to a specific person if it's an author, or to a specific brand. So you just got to be thinking about, if you're going to be attributing certain piece of information to your brand, do you want it against the whole brand, or do you want it to a specific author? Because they both have their own different uses, So maybe having somebody in your company that answers questions for you, or for users out there on discussion boards, is probably the right way of kind of dealing with that opportunity, really.
Would you recommend that they redirect to, when giving advice or answering a question, how do you make sure that it is then redirected back to their website? Or is it a matter of just like putting the brand name as their username? Like, how can we make sure that that is actually leading back to the website?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple schools of thought with this, and the advice has changed over the years, and it'll probably continue to change. Ultimately, if you have a relevant topic or relevant product, you should link it, because it is a justified reason to be presenting your website. It's difficult when you want to almost force the link in. We've seen it before on other websites out there. We've seen it where you see the suggestion as almost like a forced link within a piece of content, within a piece of copy, and you can tell. As a user, you can tell, and then also because a user can tell, likely search engines and AI engines, they can also tell, like, realistically. So you don't want to necessarily be undercutting your knowledge and your professionalism by trying to force something that doesn't need to be forced, because there's plenty of questions out there. There's plenty of reasons for you to, direct users to a website, to your website. That doesn't involve kind of, let's say not underhand moves, but just moves that are a little bit too
like pushy almost.
Too pushy,
yeah.
Exactly. That's right. There's ways of doing it that don't really undermine you in the long term.
I think it is super interesting. I think when a lot of people, and I don't blame them when they think of content, they just do think of like their blog. And that is don't get me wrong, I'm very passionate about the importance of blog content. I do also think there's so many other revenue drivers when it comes to content, and forums is one that it's kind of like a little secret that I think more and more people are going to pick up on that. So if people jump on that pretty early, they'll be able to get some really good, citations, some really good information within the AI overview. And beyond that, obviously, like we've discussed, like including these forum discussions within the FAQs on your Catalyst content, on your category pages, because these are real questions that people are asking. So it's a really good way beyond just your typical keywords to actually get people on the page. If you go in a forum and you can see the questions, the topics, and the conversation they're having, including that within your content, it's such an easy way to get people to land on your page, because that's what they want to hear.
100%. So also you've got to remember, content is part of an ecosystem. So we have the whole, the internet is an ecosystem, and content forms a part of it, and forums form another part of it. As content writers, SEO account managers, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build on the existing ecosystem, trying to build on it with kind of our footprint and our stamp, and make us the kind of the leaders in whatever industry that we're trying to work with. So there's multiple different ways of kind of building up that trust, but blogs, the reason why they never go away is because they're kind of a foundational element of content writing. Forums answer certain questions and they get often cited. They form one part of it. Blogs, core elements of topical authority, core elements of information, that won't go away, because you always need somewhere to house the larger pieces of content, the longer form stuff, the stuff that takes more than just a quick paragraph to write about. That's going to have to be housed somewhere, and the blog will always be the place that it would have to go.
Absolutely. I completely agree. There's so many conversations, like we say, about AI and how it's changing the whole landscape, but I'll always at the baseline of everything, I think it's so important to remember that the drivers are all the same. One question I think is really important, and I think we both will have our own knowledge about this. There is a strategy that can produce content, but then there's a strategy that produces content that's actually going to make revenue and that's actually going to convert. What do you kind of think are the main differences there, like just between churning out content and creating content that actually serves a purpose?
That's going to loop back to kind of the earlier discussion that we had about the having a look at what is getting served up already. So there are different types of content. They're going to have different purposes. The goal for any of our clients, any e-commerce brand, is always going to be, how do we increase revenue on site? And that question's always going to get asked: how does this content convert? How does it turn a user who's just looking at this information to somebody that's going to buy something from our brand? And the most effective way of doing that is by working the products or the product recommendations into that piece of content where it's relevant. So a lot of opportunities that we see out there that are missed currently are going to be things like having no product blocks or product recommendation blocks, not having those within the content. That's a huge opportunity that people just don't seem to be, not necessarily willing, but not seem to be thinking proactively about. It's one of those things that they're not thinking about, am I going to be writing this piece of content just for the sake of writing it? Because if you can rank a page, that's great, but it's only part of the story. They're not thinking about the other element of the spectrum, So I think when you're in that planning phase for your content writing, one of the things you're going to have to be thinking about is, I'm going to be presenting these topics and I want to be cited in these areas and I want to have these keywords being targeted, but also what am I trying to sell? Like what products do we need to get out there? Because we've seen it multiple times where you can write about a specific category, and if you put the right products within that specific category, users will navigate from your content through to the product pages and then convert. And if they don't convert then, they'll come back and they'll convert later because now they're more informed. So yeah, I think that there's an opportunity out there that a lot of brands just aren't utilizing, which is that, that commercialization of the content. I think they're just not doing it well enough. And it's something that we've been working on in eComOne. But we're just noticing that other brands and other agencies even just aren't necessarily taking advantage of the opportunity.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I will say there is something kind of controversial. Not all content is actually there to convert. It's not always going to be a revenue driver. Some of it is just there. Like we've spoken about, building that authority, making sure that you've got that domain authority to then rank for other, the more important keywords that you want, the more important topics. Some of the content that you need to produce is going to be the baseline of just making sure that Google will see you as an expert. And also some content takes a long time, which is really frustrating, but some content you might not see for a while, and it doesn't mean that it's a bad piece of content. It is just the name of the game, which is really frustrating at times. I think we've all had the frustration of, this is a great piece of content, why is it not moving, why is it not doing anything? And it's just a matter of being patient, but also understanding that not every single bit of content is actually going to make you money in terms of like directly, but overall actually it can really boost you in terms of like whether it's thought leadership, whether it's like just building, your kind of expertise in that area. So Google does see you as a leader in that sector. 100%.
Is that topical authority? That's ultimately the name of the game. We're trying to build up topical authority. You've got the EAT metric that's still live, it's still present, and if anything, it's more important now than ever. So I think you're spot on there. Not everything is going to convert, and not everything is there to convert. But I do just sometimes feel that the opportunity to convert is sometimes missed.
I do agree with you. I do agree. I think it's just understanding why you've produced that bit of content.
Exactly.
Like, is it actually going to be a converter, or is it just a matter of like getting the baseline of trust there to build 100%. A domain authority? And it's frustrating, isn't it? I think at times when something takes a while, or you produce a bit of content and it's just, you sort of think, oh, maybe it will be a converter, but actually it just ends up being like an educational piece. So something that I touched on, and because I'm really passionate about it, so I'm going to bring it straight back round to this topic, is speaking not just, for information, but also emotionally. And it's a big thing at the moment with AI. And as a content writer myself, as a content lead, one of the things that I find the most difficult to explain at first is why you would need a content writer or someone like us at eComOne to write your content when technically you could just use AI. And I think for me, like, AI cannot replace, and I'm so standing my ground on this, it cannot replace a content writer, because whenever I have tried to use AI to help with my writing, it is just so like monotone. Every single bit of content reads exactly the same. Like, I could be writing about ponies and glitter, and then I could be writing about swords. I don't write about these things, but if I did, I wish I did. But, it would read exactly the same. It doesn't have any nuances to who it's writing for. It can't replicate the human anecdotes, not antidotes. So excuse me. ChatGPT would not have got that wrong. Or just the human nature. Like, humans don't want to read content that is boring. And even if it is like a topic that you would sort of think, oh, it's not really that interesting. Like, like printer ink, for example, that's the first thing that's coming to my head. That is not an interesting thing to read about, but it doesn't mean that you can't put a bit of fun in there. You can't put a bit of like emotional, like, anything emotional in there that is actually going to like change the reader's perspective and why they should pick your product over anything else.
100%.
And I think AI just isn't there yet in terms of, it's great at giving you some information. It's great at giving you some, some data. I mean, not all the time, because it actually makes stuff up a lot all the time. So it might be interesting to jump into your perspective, and that's one of them, about, how can you kind of make sure that your content is factual but also made for a human. And one of those would be making sure that all the facts are correct, because AI makes stuff up all the time,
constantly. The more you use it, the more flaws you find with it. So with AI, it's a great tool, but it's just a tool. It doesn't replace an entire effectively industry of content writing, doesn't replace an entire industry of people that have been writing for multiple decades. Often it can't do what they can do because it doesn't know what they know. It only ever knows one position and one thing, and it really only presents information in one way. It's that whole, we can read through a piece of content. If we see an M dash, we're immediately suspicious. It might not be AI written, but if we see multiple M dashes, we can probably assume.
It is so easy to pick up on AI. Once you know, you know.
Yeah. And whereas it's not this, it's this, we immediately spot.
Absolutely. It really drives me crazy.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid the pitfalls of an audience that is growing more and more aware of this. A year ago, people weren't necessarily clued up out there in the wider world about what AI writing looks like. People could still, I wouldn't say be fooled, but they could assume that something isn't written by AI, whereas in fact it is. But I think the more we live with this tool, the more we can spot it. So you're trying to avoid that pitfall of writing like something that people are immediately going to disengage with once they realize that it's AI. Because a lot of times people read an answer from AI, but they only really care about the answer to a question they've asked directly. They don't want to read an entire piece of content about something they haven't asked, written by a tool effectively. So a lot of the foundation, of the topics you're going to be writing about, the titles, the way that it needs to be written, who the audience is, a lot of the questions that you want to get answered within that piece of content, that all has to come from a human. And if you just let AI try and answer those questions for you, it will just, unfortunately, it's not cut out to consider all the factors that we instinctively factor in whenever we do any of this content writing.
How do you think, like, say you have a piece of content and it's not a badly written piece of content, but it's just very AI. Like, you can tell that's AI versus a piece that is maybe a similar structure, but it is written by a human. Do you think it affects revenue?
So I think currently the way that the current thinking is that AI content doesn't derank a web page. However, what I will say is that AI written content does have lower engagement. And therefore, if it has lower engagement, you'll have higher things like bounce rates. You'll have higher things like also have a lower engagement time. Now, those do have an impact on revenue, because the more that trend is seen, especially by Google, but other search engines out there as well, the more the trend of that page not necessarily giving an answer to a question that users asking, the more that trend carries on, the lower the trust signals, the lower the topical authority, and you almost undermine yourself. So you do yourself a disservice by putting a piece of content out there that's completely written by AI. And sure, it might be written well enough at a glance, but if it's not written well enough to overcome some of those the challenges with AI written content that we just discussed earlier, I think you'll be undermining a lot of the work that you're doing.
I completely agree with you. I think a lot of people, they see, oh, it's ranking, so it's going to do well. That is not what that means. Unfortunately, I really wish it did mean that, a piece of content is ranking, so it's going to do well. But I personally get put off if I go onto a web page and I can see that it, like, particularly if it's for a service, and I can see that it has been completely and very obviously written by AI. It really puts me off.
Yep.
And I know a lot of people feel the same about that, and I just think we need to factor in the fact like there's bounce rates, and I don't think people do engage as well with AI written content, and just because Google doesn't actually mark you down right now if it can flag AI, it doesn't mean that's not going to change.
We don't know if that's going to change.
We don't know.
We know it can spot it.
Yeah, we know it can spot it, and the algorithm changes so quick. Like, it is frustrating how quickly it can change, and you don't want to have all this backlog of just purely AI written content and then it's all just devalued, or like all just stops ranking because then Google's changed the rules basically.
Yep. And
so
they'll never tell you.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll just wake up one day and it'll all be, God, we're really putting the fear into people right now, but I do think it's such an important thing to make sure we are putting that human element into content and we're not just copy and pasting
100%.
things.
It's great. Like I said, it's a great tool. It'll give you a great draft. It'll give you all the kind of the stats and the facts that you need just to check first. It'll give you all the bulk information, but it needs that person to go through it, to check it, to make sure that the information it's providing is true, to make sure those stats are accurate. Like we touched on earlier, unfortunately, it does just sometimes make things up.
Oh my God, it's ridiculous. I sound like a hater. Like, I'm not against AI and I think it's a great tool, but I just think like people are using it too much.
I think people use it just in the wrong ways.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. Completely agree. I think that it's good for a certain amount of things, but I think copy and pasting content, for me,
it's just not the way.
It breaks my heart.
I don't think it's it's one of those things. We've seen it out there. We've already seen it out there in the real world. It doesn't do well. So we can say with confidence that that's not the right strategy. However, in us using AI, so in eComOne, it's obviously a tool. We're going to use AI. What would you say is a really good use case for the use of these tools? Like, where do you see it factoring into our content writing process?
I personally do like it for a very high level research tool. I think you have to fact check, and it's that we keep saying this because it does make stuff up. So when you are getting, say, like data statistics to add into your articles, always make sure you say, give me the primary source for this piece of information, and actually read it, because sometimes it's giving me a primary source and actually it's linked me to a completely different study. It's not been correct, but I actually do think it is really great for sifting through like all these data, like all different pieces of data, and actually being able to create a story from there. I think it's good from a PR perspective. I've been able to scrape emails and contact information of different publications, and I also do think it's good for giving you the layout of an article, so you know in a way that makes sense. So making sure that all the headers are structured correctly in a way and in an order that makes sense. So I think that is good. I'm just against it like writing the whole piece of content. Like I don't think you can't use it. I just think it needs to be used in a way that is smart and actually makes sense. And sometimes what I actually like to do as well is I like to run my piece of content through it and say, am I missing anything versus the competitor? Because then it can spot actually areas that you can improve on, build on, that you may have missed before, and actually can get you that number one spot, or get you into the search engines, the AI search engines as well. I think that is a really good starting point to use it. I just think overusing it to write the piece of content and then straight up copy and pasting is just a no-go for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's talk a bit about PR.
Yes.
So when we write content, one of the goals we want to achieve is that it gets picked up by publications. Like that's ultimately one of the big wins in content writing is getting an article that you've written picked up. How do you go about making sure that the content you write is likely to get picked up in a publication? Like, what do you think are the 3 golden rules that you want to follow when you're writing something for that purpose?
So I would say, just for context, I've got a background as a journalist. I also studied PR. So I have kind of an understanding of that. But I would say the way that you write a piece of content is very different from how you would write a PR piece. You know, a piece of content, you're weaving facts throughout the article. It's not just all in one go. A piece of PR, you need to put it's like we call it like an inverted pyramid. You need to put all the facts straight up. A journalist only has a very small amount of time to figure out if they want to run with a story or not. So you need to put like the who, what, where, why, when within the first couple of sentences. It all needs to be there. And the least interesting piece of information, it's like that funnel. You go down and down. It's really important that you put exactly why they should publish your story first and foremost. It cannot be salesy in any sort of way. I'd avoid putting links in there. Like a couple of links is fine, but like as in you don't want to stuff it full of links. You don't really want to put any external links. It is very, very different. And also when you're doing outreach for an email, you don't want that email to be lengthy. Everything needs to be really short and sharp, straight to the point. And really think about why somebody would be interested in reading this story. If you're reading that, like, I wouldn't necessarily pick it up and be like, you know, people's attention spans are so much smaller nowadays.
Yeah.
And if you think, oh, well, I wouldn't probably click on that, it needs to be, I don't want to say shock factor or like shock value, because not everything needs to be controversial, but it needs to grab people's attention. So
it's a good hook.
Yeah,
hook
the
people
hook
in.
is so important. Almost the headline is actually probably more important in some ways than the actual content itself, because that is the first thing that anyone is going to see. And it may not be the way that the journalist will write it. They may change things, but having all of the information in the first paragraph is actually really essential to making sure that your story will get picked up. It's hard now. I will say the landscape has changed so much and it's getting harder to do just as like a sole marketer. It's why, you know, we offer it as a service here at eComOne, because I know a lot of people struggle with that because people see it as an extra revenue source now. So it's getting harder to get a free placement. A lot of times if you include a link, they're like, right, well, now you need to pay like £1,000 to get it placed, which is just, it's extortionate really.
Sure.
So you just need to find a way of making sure it's newsworthy and it's not just like a product placement.
I suppose though that goes into the value element of it, doesn't it? If it's got that kind of price tag, it's because, well, I guess a lot of journalists or a lot of publications out there have now clued up to the value of links and link building, and they've clued up to the reason that, you know, agencies were previously reaching out to them with these articles. I'm sure they asked themselves, you know, why are people putting so much effort into these articles almost for free? Well, now they realize that it's not necessarily for free. It's because we get a lot out of it by including links into it. So when you want to include a link within a piece of content for PR, do you think that comes up against any sort of friction with the publications themselves?
I think so. I've had to have conversations where I've said to them, look, we really need to make sure that this link is included. We've had to have conversations about like how the link is phrased, how it's placed. I think it's really important to not be salesy. And even the link, you know, they might query the link and say, actually, is there a less like a product placement? They don't want to really include specific products. Is there a landing page that they can put it on? So I think making sure that you choose your link carefully and making sure it actually makes sense within that article. You know, that's the best way of going about it, because yeah, you probably will have to have conversations, or they may just upload the article without the link. And the name mentioned, don't get me wrong, is still really useful. It just is so much better if there is a link.
Yeah, it gives you something of value that directly builds, you know, trust to your website, which is also what we're trying to do. It makes that connection really direct. So that's a really interesting piece of insight there. So would you say, therefore, that a piece of content that's written well enough could kind of overcome a lot of those hurdles that a publication might have with including a link?
I think so. It honestly depends on the topic. Being completely honest, like I think I've seen it before where there's been an amazing PR release, but it's just not been eye-grabbing enough, or it's not actually like, you know, you need to make sure that the story isn't just plucked out of thin air. It needs to actually have something of value. It needs to actually be like something people would actually click on and read, or else it's not worth the attention of the journalist. And it is unfortunate. It goes back to that thing of like, in the past, you know, when I first started my career, it was very much like people within PR and journalism, they work really closely together because a journalist needed a story and a PR person had a story. So it was very much like they worked together, and it was like an equal level of they both got something out of it. Whereas now, because like a lot of publications have shut, like, you know, there's not that many, you know, so many, like Enemy, for example, that's closed now. It's not a magazine anymore. Like, just the way that people get their information has changed. So journalists are finding other ways of getting that revenue. Like you said, they've kind of realized, hold on, we could be making a little bit of money here. But there are ways about it. Like, you know, I've secured placements without paying a penny. So I think it is just making sure that you are not just writing any old PR piece that actually only your company would find interesting. You need to make sure it's valuable to the outside audience as well. And that is a much better way of, if you think of like, why would a journalist actually want to write about this? And then that's how you write your piece. It's not a company announcement. It's much wider than that. That's how you need to approach it to make sure that you're actually getting something out of it.
Absolutely. And timeliness, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Trends are a big thing. And I know it's not always easy to jump on a trend. But I do think, yeah, timing it right as well. So if you're doing like an event, what else could you link it to? Is there anything else out there that actually is of interest that we could kind of relate it to a little bit? But it's hard. It's not, PR's I think a hard one. I think it's changing, but I just think focusing on pushing something that's actually newsworthy rather than just pumping out PR press releases. Like, I'd rather spend more time focusing on something that's really newsworthy, and also develop relationships with journalists. Don't just ping them an email saying, will you publish this? Like, get to know them, see if there's any way that you can actually build relationships with them. And that's something that we do here at eComOne. And I think that's a really important part of it as well.
That's traditionally how PR was, how the original PR kind of pieces were spread around, wasn't it? It was through word of mouth, it was through meetings, it was through lunches. And, you know, you would effectively build up these relationships. And then if you have something on offer, you'd be the first person they'd go to. So when it comes down to kind of getting something that's timely out there, would you say that quality over timeliness or timeliness over quality?
Ooh, now that is, I always think quality over anything. I don't think you should publish anything that you want or proud to put your name to, even if it does mean being a little bit late on the bandwagon. I don't see the point in publishing something that looks, first of all, it probably won't get published. If it's not actually up to standard, it probably won't get published anyway. I will always say quality over quantity. Same with any type of content. And it links back again to the AI thing, is don't just pump out content. Make sure it is of, you know, you're putting your name to that. And there is absolutely no point just to jump on something to push out something that is like very low effort, or actually, if it doesn't actually make any sense, or if it doesn't really suit you, then why bother doing it in a way? I do think timeliness is important, but like only if it's actually relevant.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is a tricky one.
Especially in the age of like TikTok and various you know, effectively newer social media, short form content, short attention spans. You know, that is going to be changing. So it's going to be one of those questions it's going to forever kind of be up there with how we form our plans together. It's like, do we want to be the absolute first on the market with this topic, or do we want to put in some more time and kind of wait to see what the opportunity really looks like?
It's such a hard one, isn't it? Because I do sort of think, yeah, you need, if you can get in before anybody else, that gives you an automatic, not just talking PR now, just like content wise, then it kind of gives you an automatic way to get right to the top, doesn't it? Of like, even if a keyword, and this is also something I actually want to ask you, is about keywords that maybe have low volume. A lot of people seem to avoid them, thinking, oh, there's not much point. But actually, that could be a really quick win in the future if it's really relevant to you. What do you think about that? You know, going for, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but maybe the ones that people think, oh, well, it's got like 10 searches. Do you still think that's worth going after?
It's a really interesting one. So it's not even necessarily a question about what could it be in the future. It's about what is happening to that keyword right now. So even though something might have low search volumes, we're looking at like 10, 20, 30 searches a month. If it's that niche, somebody's looking for that specific page, you can have very low competition for those sorts of keywords. But also those users are often going to have quite high intent. So this isn't true of every single low volume keyword. You're going to have keywords out there that just have low search volumes because they're not popular. But you will sometimes find certain keywords have a low search volume but have a really high purchase intent. And it's about getting almost like the right piece of content for those users, because there's no one else that's going to be giving them that information. So if they do need something really specific, you could be the only one on the market to give them that. And then therefore, if it's a high enough value service or high enough value product, there could still be a lot of money to be made off of these low search volume keywords if you put in the right thought. Almost like if you add up the equation well enough, you could figure out that there's actually nobody going for these keywords. And when you're starting out with an SEO strategy, you obviously go for you see what is out there in terms of the total keyword space. But one of the main things you also look at is opportunities. Where have we traditionally not tried to push our content? What keywords are we currently not ranking for? And you go through that list, and looking past the search volume is part of good SEO. Because if you just go by search volume, you're only ever going to be fighting battles that other people are already fighting. You really want to be thinking about opportunities outside of just the obvious. And the hidden opportunities are sometimes some of the biggest wins.
I love that. That's so true. We know a previous company that I used to work for, we wrote an article, and I think it was like 70% of the traffic, and you would never think that looking at its data. It looked like it had like 10 search volumes a month when they picked it up, and it just grew and grew and grew until the point that we actually, even with the stuff that we were doing really well for, it still did not bring as much traffic. So it just shows the importance of like getting in there with the keywords that you may not think actually are the biggest wins.
There's actually a really funny article out there. So some other SEOs might have seen this before, but there was an SEO out there somewhere in the States, and he had put a piece of content out and misspelled the word plumber into plumbering. And then that became one of his highest pieces of traffic, or highest revenue pieces of content, because nobody else was out there competing for the word plumbering because it's spelled incorrectly.
So
he was there.
Were searching it wrong were finding this bit
there
of
was
content.
Only him within the local area. So it's a very niche example of that, but it does go to show like sometimes thinking outside the box. And I don't recommend misspelling a word intentionally. Just for the record, I would never recommend that. But I'm just saying that is an opportunity that somebody did take advantage of what would traditionally be a niche kind of keyword that nobody else would really be looking for. We've spoken a lot about content, we've spoken a lot about AI, we've spoken a lot about kind of the way that the market's moved and how to take advantage of opportunities within the content creating space. If you could make one recommendation for a new content writer out there just starting out in their role, what would you tell them to kind of think about first?
I would tell them, and it's something I've banged on so much in this podcast because it is the main thing that I think people are losing out on now, is getting emotional, putting your own personality in there, obviously within your brand guidelines, but don't be afraid to just have fun with it. I think a lot of brands now are missing the fun factor. People don't want to read content that is boring. People don't want to, they'll click on an article, get within the first sentence, and you'd only have a few sentences to get someone's attention. So just don't be afraid to really play around with it, do something different, and just have a bit of that personality, because that is what people want to see, and that's what makes people buy. And that is how you build a loyal customer base of people who actually like your brand, not just your product.
Totally agree. People are looking for that personality, aren't they? They don't want the cold, corporate spiel. They want to see what's behind just a product. What else are they buying into? What's the history, for example?
So what would your main tip be as well beyond that?
For a new content writer, I'd be telling them to look beyond what they know. So they're going to have a predisposed idea of how something should be written or how it should work. They should look at how other people have been writing, how other pieces of content are already published, what else is out there in the space. So they have to kind of consider a bit more about what more do they want to offer outside of what's already been taught to them? Because I think people get very closed off with the way that they think and the way that they want to write, especially if they've been writing in the same kind of content for quite a while. I think people should sometimes just take a step back and see what's working out there and then build on it. I think there's just not enough building happening. I think people get too into the routine of things. So
I completely agree. So if you had to give, a book recommendation, a tool, anything like that, what would you give?
So there is a book that I read about a couple of years ago now, and it's a really niche one, and it's kind of weird, but I really enjoyed it. So it's called How to Read Water. Mm-hmm. There's basically, let me get his name. His name's Tristan Gooley. And he basically spent his entire life almost obsessed with water, looking at the patterns of it, seeing how it evolves. And what he found was that the patterns and behaviors that you see in a puddle get replicated larger and larger and larger into what's happening in oceans and in the Atlantic. So he basically spent his entire life so far studying it. So he's got loads of really interesting bits of knowledge about it. But I think the core of it is that you can find the answers in the detail. So if you're looking for an answer out in the ocean, sometimes looking at a puddle will give you what you want. And I think we can carry that over to other topics, and especially in SEO, especially in content writing. I think we can take that raw and we can apply it to what we do in a really nice way. So yeah, I highly recommend people read that if they're interested in water. It's very water specific.
Very water based. Amazing. That sounds great. I've not heard of that. I think mine would be, it's called Working Hard or Hardly Working by Grace Beverly. She's an entrepreneur. She runs many amazing brands that I absolutely love, such as Shreddy, We Are Tala, the Productivity Method. And it actually follows the Productivity Method, which is all about ensuring you're actually getting the best out of your work, and it's not just fake productivity. How some people have that competition of I'm the most productive and I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do this and this. It's actually getting the most out of your day without burning yourself out, which I think is a really important topic, especially in the era of LinkedIn, when everyone seems to want to do the most.
Age, everyone has so much to do, super busy.
Exactly. And so it's all about prioritizing your work in certain ways. I highly recommend it. It's actually really helped me make sure that I'm actually getting the best out of my organization or my planning without feeling overwhelmed or burnt out.
That's really interesting. I think I need to get that one to read.
Yeah, I can lend it to you. Okay, cool. So if anybody wanted to continue the conversation with you, Alex, how would you like them to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So if anybody wants to reach out or you can have a discussion about any of these points or topics, I'm more than happy to talk with you guys. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Alex Spooner on LinkedIn, and I look exactly like this on my profile picture, so you'll be able to find me there.
Yeah, me too. So my LinkedIn is Aoife Daly, spelled AOIFE. DALY, in case people don't know how to spell that. And then it's the same Aoife at eComOne.com, and we're more than happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast, so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on the next one.